Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 15th, 2026, and Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey will be released in 2 days' time. I've been doing videos just providing narratives and discussion and just, but little analysis uh, of The Odyssey. I've read the book by Homer. It's an epic poem, of course, and it's often described as the greatest story ever told. It's a page turner. I really enjoyed it, so that even a modern reader would, really enjoys, the epic poem. Today, I didn't read it as a poem. It's been translated over years. It was written by the Greek poet Homer. Um, and by the way, they say when that it would have been recited orally, right? It would have been portrayed orally, and over time, because Homer lived in the 8th century BC, and over time it would have been it was transcribed, it was codified and written, like a novel. But today, what I want to do is do more of analysis and not just describe the story. Uh, and the analysis I want to do is with respect to, critics who suggest that Homer is misogynistic in his treatment of women. Of course, before the Odyssey, Homer wrote the Iliad, and one of the ways that critics have you know criticized Homer is that it appears that uh, women are the source of men's troubles, right? If anybody recalls the Iliad, which is sort of like a first book, like a preface to, it's like a first book, the prelude to the Odyssey. Um, of course, the central figure in the Iliad is Achilles, and who dies in the end. He's not in, he's not a main character in the Odyssey, but uh, women are suggested as being the source of the Trojan War, right? So the Iliad is about the Trojan War, the 10-year Trojan War. Of course, it was because Helen of Troy, also known as Helen of Sparta, she was Helen of Sparta at the time, was you know either abducted or eloped with Paris, right? Paris was the Trojan prince, son of King Priam. So, and that was the reason the Greeks, that's Agamemnon and the Greek forces, went to war with the Trojans. Uh, Helen of Troy, or Helen of Sparta, was the wife of Agamemnon's younger brother Menelaus. Menelaus was king of Sparta, and of course, uh, Menelaus had welcomed Paris to his home, and he abused, Greek hospitality, what was known as Xenia. Xenia is a form of Greek hospitality ordered by Zeus, right? And by the way, my discussion is on the classics, right? I'm discussing the classics, the study of the Greeks and Greek mythology, including their gods, and the Romans as well, which our founding fathers studied, right? They were masters of the classics. That's the study of Greek civilization, their mythology, and the same thing with the Latin civilization and their mythology. Sometimes you call this Greco-Roman, right? Um, that has nothing to do with my personal convictions, right? This is just an academic study. So Menelaus, uh, Menelaus's wife, who was Helen of Troy or Helen of Sparta, was abducted by Paris, and so this was an insult to Xenia. That's what was called Greek hospitality, and so of course the Greeks went to war against um, the Trojans, right? So you can see a woman, how a woman is central to the war, like the source of the Trojan, the 10-year Trojan War, and the eventual destruction of of Troy. Um, Even prior to that, in the Iliad, right, you see that uh, it's the female goddesses, right, that are manipulating Paris, right? The female goddesses, that's Hera, who was the wife of Zeus, and his daughters, Athena and Aphrodite, right? They manipulated, they got Paris, right? Paris to judge who was the most beautiful of the goddesses. And he chose Aphrodite, and of course, this incurred the wrath of Hera and Athena, and they vowed to destroy Troy, right? So you can see female goddesses again manipulating men, and this is very constant. You see this happening in the Odyssey, right? So in the Odyssey, Odysseus, who despite his love and pining for his wife Penelope, is constantly being manipulated by these lustful, lecherous, lascivious, female goddess, these female immortals, right? These goddesses. There was Circe, right? The goddess Circe, who, in exchange for him, for in exchange for her freeing his men, whom she'd turned into swine, right? She asks Odysseus to go to bed with her, right? And he does, so she can free his men because they'd been turned to swine. And eventually, though, although it was Odysseus's choice, right? Odysseus's choice to remain her lover for a year because he was captivated by her. But you could see the portrayal of the goddess, that Circe, as being evil, right? Because she has these potions and magic spells of captivating men, ensnaring them, and turning them into animals. And that's what he had done to Odysseus's men. She turned Odysseus's men into swine. And the only reason why she couldn't turn Odysseus himself into an animal was because the god, the messenger god, that's Hermes, had instructed him ahead of time and gave him a herbal antidote called Mali, right? So he took the Mali, and it insulated him against her poison, because she gave him, the wine, or, to drink, the potions, magic potions to drink, and he wasn't susceptible. He didn't turn into an animal. He was insulated against her magic, right? But he did sleep with her, though, because Hermes had instructed him that the way he could get the goddess Circe to free his men, to turn them back to humans, was to sleep with her. And he did. He slept with her. And you see the case of Calypso as well. So he's going from one goddess to another. You see Calypso as well. Even though she rescues him from shipwreck, because Odysseus is suffering on the seas and going in circles on the seas because he's incurred the wrath of Poseidon, who is Zeus's brother and he's god of the seas, right? Because Odysseus had blinded his son, the one-eyed Cyclops, Polyphemus, and so Poseidon sort of curses him, and Odysseus is just wandering for 10 years, and from escaping one peril after the other on the seas. But Calypso saves him, when he's shipwrecked, but she didn't save him, altruistically. She wants to marry him. She wants him to marry her. Calypso is a goddess, and she basically holds him captive. She detains him for 7 years on her island, right, on the island of Ogygia. And even though he's living in the lap of luxury, he becomes her lover, right? He becomes her lover for 7 years, and every time she asks him, to marry her, and then she would turn him into an immortal, right? Into an immortal, he wouldn't die. But instead, he's pining all the time for his wife until Zeus commands her, right, to release him so he can return to his family. So you can see constantly there are females who appear, female characters who appear lecherous, or they're constantly causing uh, problems for male protagonists, for male characters in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and uh, they constantly weaponizing sex. There's a portrayal as if they're just lustful, and as if that's all the females are there for sex. However, on the other hand, we can see the virtues and the power, the agency that Homer gives women, right? One, they're not entirely lecherous, right? They're the goddesses who, they seem lustful. Actually, I forgot to mention Odysseus's disloyal servants, his female servants. His female servants, while he's away, become, sexual partners to his wife's suitors, right? Where the suitors who are eating him out of house and home, right? While he's detained on his circuitous wanderings on the seas for 10 years. So while he'd been gone for an aggregate of 20 years. So you can see the female servants were lustful. They were lascivious. They were having sex with their mistresses' suitors, right? So so Homer does portray them in one you know uh, way that's not, it doesn't really put women in a good light, as being, they seem to be very lustful, and just, over sexualization of women, and they're just very lascivious, right? They're just lustful and wanting, they just view men for sex, to just satisfy their sexual pleasures. But at the same time, consider Penelope, right? Consider Penelope, the wife of Odysseus. She never yields in the 20 years, right, that Odysseus is gone. And Odysseus, who is, by the way, having sex with all these goddesses, although it seems against his will. In the case of Calypso, right, it's against his will. But nevertheless, he's still enjoying himself. And in the case of Circe, um, even though he the first time he does it with Circe, he's instructed by a god to do it, and she demands it from him, right, in exchange for her freeing his men. But after that, he stays with her for a year, right, by his own will. She doesn't use her charms on him, because he has the antidote of Mali. But he's captivated by her, and he sleeps with her for a year. He's her lover on her island for a year, while his wife is virtuous and remains faithful. And we see that even in his wife's son, right? In Telemachus, we see the misogyny, the sexism, the male dominance portrayed in Telemachus's silencing of his mother. There was a time that a bard was singing of the Trojan War, and she came downstairs and asked the bard to stop, because it was making her sad, because her husband was gone. But Telemachus silences her and tells her to return to her room, to return to her weaving, right? So you can see her own son sort of dominating her. But at the same time, if we look at it, Homer seems to be portraying men as more violent, right? They're more violent, they're more aggressive towards women. So that even though Circe, for instance, is a goddess and she has all these charms and spells, Hermes instructs Odysseus that, well, if he threatens her with his sword, right, she'd relent. She'd relent, and Odysseus does that. He threatens her with his sword. But nevertheless, Homer still portrays a lot of evils, a lot of perils in the form of women, like the sea monsters, the monsters Scylla and Charybdis. They're feminine characters, but again, as a counterpoint, the redeeming power of women is portrayed by Homer. The redeeming power as protectors of men, Again, in a maternalistic manner, feminist scholars would view it as also, viewing women, when women are portrayed as being overly maternal and protective, it's viewed in a negative light by feminist scholars, and we see a lot of this in Homer's The Odyssey. So that even when they're being portrayed in a virtuous manner, they're being portrayed as, being maternal, right? That maternal protection, whether it's with the queen of the Phaeacians, right? Uh, Nausicaa, their daughter, the princess, had instructed uh, Odysseus that when he approaches the palace, instead of pleading with the father, the king, that he should throw himself at the feet and, wrap himself around the knees of Queen Aret, her mother, to seek protection, her protection, in which he does, and she grants it. So, and we also see even in Leucothea, right, the final goddess who saves Odysseus, right? When Poseidon capsizes, destroys his raft, and Odysseus is sinking, Leucothea saves him again. Leucothea was the former mortal Ino, who's transformed into a goddess, and again she saves Odysseus using her veil. And remember that the Olympian goddess Athena, who ultimately protects him and pleads with Zeus, and gives him victory in the final battle, is Athena, right? So women are, if they're portrayed in a virtuous light, it's again in a very maternal way, and feminine scholars, they have an issue with that women are either portrayed as being sexual, and if they're any sort of, if they're viewed in a positive light, as being as maternal protectors, just like Athena is, or Leucothea is, or Queen Aret, that's Princess Nausicaa's mother, is towards Odysseus, and that their own agency is denied, right? So you see, while Odysseus is gallivanting, I mean, he's having sex, he's held captive, but he's having sex with these goddesses and living in the lap of luxury, uh, while his wife remains loyal to him. That's Penelope. Penelope, her own desires uh, for love, for romance, is denied, and she's just holding out for him, right? So women are clearly denied of agency, and they do seem to be tools of men. While of course, I mean, you can argue there's a balance, because the men are also tools of women, right? They're manipulated by the goddesses, right? The in the Iliad, the Trojan War is precipitated due to the contest by the when Paris judges the beauty of the goddesses, Hera, Zeus's wife, and his daughters, Athena and Aphrodite, right? So, and Calypso, right, the goddess who detains Odysseus as his lover on her island of Ogygia. So they're constantly tools of men. Even Princess Nausicaa, whom Odysseus he doesn't exploit her sexually, but she's captivated by him. He's an older man, old enough to be her father. Remember, Odysseus was gone for 20 years. So Odysseus was a middle-aged man. He wasn't a young man. Meanwhile, she was a young, beautiful woman, beautiful princess. But she was, attracted to a man old enough to be her father. And he flatters her, right? He calls her, that he says, when he sees her on the island of Scheria, when he's absolutely naked and he's helpless, but he sort of is able to flatter her and says, she looks like a goddess, that she might be the goddess Artemis, right? Artemis, or if she's not a goddess, then she is, her parents must be very blessed because of her beauty. She's very beautiful. And eventually she falls in love with him and wants him to be her husband. And even her father, King Alcinous proposes, offers her in marriage to Odysseus. But Odysseus, we see his sort of loyalty here because he rejects this and he remains loyal to his wife. He wants to go back to his wife Penelope. He doesn't know what has happened. He doesn't know if Penelope is married somebody else, and so despite so we see the Phaeacians were very very noble peoples because despite the fact that he refuses to marry uh, the princess Nausicaa, and after their hospitality, they load him with a lot of gold and a lot of luxuries, right? They give him a lot of gold and help him return to Ithaca, right? Um, so we see that he did use Nausicaa as a tool, right? Odysseus uses Nausicaa as a tool as well. So this theme is very recurrent, that women, they're denied a form of agency, right? And of course, men dominate them despite the powers of the female characters, whether they're goddesses or they're humans. They remain ultimately instruments of men. The goddesses want Odysseus to satisfy their sexual needs. So women are, they're viewed as sexual objects, right? Constantly desiring sex. And if they're not constantly desiring sex, even when they're a stabilizing figure, they're viewed as maternal, right? Their protection portrayed as matriarchs, right? They're viewed as maternalistic. And of course, feminist scholars have an issue with that it's a form of sexism, denying women as agency, because mothers, they sacrifice for everybody. That's what mothers do. They sacrifice for everybody, for their children, for their husbands, and for the home. And so we see this denial of agency by Homer. Of course, those were his time. That was because of his times. He was living in ancient times, almost 2,000 years ago. But in any event, what am I saying? Almost 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, right? Homer lived in the 8th century, right? 8th century BC. I'll stop this video here and I'll continue with discussions on the Odyssey. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.